Here we go. Back. Part 2. Oh, there's my cat. He is, oh boy. Alright, let's go. So, since I was streaming earlier, I have done another 1,000+ words, so currently word count total is 71,342. 71,342. So I need another 28,658. But yeah, for this whole document, the word count now is surpass the one I'm editing. So this will take 10 days to edit and rewrite at minimum. So I'm gonna need that last 10 days of the month. But, you know, whatever. Kicking ass. Alright, so we were here. Chapter 8. Yes, sir. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, chapter 7. Yeah, okay. So, cruising along. I'm not going to do the whole explain everything because I was on earlier. You can watch those streams. They're still on there. So, yeah. Let's see. Let's find something to watch. And get on with this edit. That might be interesting. What about 13th century Malaysia? How does that sound interesting? 13th century. Java versus the Mongols. Dope. That's exactly something that I can put on. There's one. No. I'm just gonna start with this one. And yeah, pause that. And let me see. Hey, real quick, anybody who is watching, solo on Kick, thank you. Nobody on Twitch, 0. YouTube, 0. Facebook, 0. And alright, so gonna start the editing. Let's watch this and get on with it. Oh, say we got other stuff. Maja Fit. Oh yeah. This is plenty entertaining. Alright, here we go.
The most famous of the failed Mongol naval expeditions of the 13th century, it was not the only one. In the early 1290s, Mongol ruler and emperor of the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan, ordered a fleet to sail from southern China to Java in modern Indonesia, a campaign which resulted in a humiliating retreat. The expedition against Java was one of the last military campaigns ordered by Kublai in his long life, and like many of these later invasions, cost the Yuan heavily in men and resources for little gain. In this part of our series on how to defend against the Mongols, we look at how the inhabitants of Java were able to prevent their islands from becoming part of the Mongol Empire, with little damage to their own people. This video was sponsored by our kind YouTube members and patrons. Becoming a YouTube member or patron is the best way to support our work, so we're now providing our supporters with exclusive videos to thank them. Join their ranks to watch the Pacific War series, alongside the First Punic War, Sulla's biography, the Italian War of Unification, Risorgimento, the Russo-Japanese War, Albigensian Crusade, History of Prussia, and much more. 80 or so exclusive videos in total. In 2024, YouTube members and patrons will watch series on the fall of Sparta, the Reconquista, Second Punic War, Spanish War of Succession, and Russian Civil War, and will continue getting early access to all videos, access to an exclusive Discord server, will know our schedule, and vote on future videos. YouTube member and patron support allows us to keep the majority of our videos free in a world where YouTube monetization income is very uneven. If you want to support our work, join their ranks today via the link in the description and pinned comment. Thank you. In the 13th century, eastern Java and parts of the neighbouring islands of Sumatra and Borneo came under the influence of the Kingdom of Tumapel, named for the city of the same name on the island of Java. It was also known as the Kingdom of Singhasari, thanks to its king Jaya Wisnuhadhana, who changed it to be called this. The Tumapel kings were not absolute rulers, as much of their kingdom was made up of loosely controlled vassal kings and chiefs. But they controlled a lucrative position along the maritime trade routes through Indonesia and across the southern coastline of the Eurasian landmass. By the 12th century, Java was a leading exporter of goods from India to China, especially rice, pepper and safflower dye, while in turn importing gold, silver, lacquerware, iron goods and ceramics from China. The Southeast Asian sea trade was a valuable market which had been expanding considerably since the 9th century, and one which attracted the attention of a man hungry for world conquest. By the 1280s, the Mongol Great Khan Kublai had successfully conquered China, but other victories were frustratingly eluding him in Central Asia, Japan, Vietnam and Burma. As he advanced in years, the knowledge that he was failing to bring the rest of the world under Mongol authority weighed heavily on him. Now in his 70s, with his poor health, depression, deaths of his friends and family, increasing removal from affairs of state, and awareness of his own impending mortality, Kublai became desperate for victories to console his aching spirit. Economic aspects too were not to be overlooked, and were simply a factor in the inevitable universal domination. Kublai's Yuan dynasty, while influenced by China's Confucian norms and traditions, maintained the Mongolian practicality regarding merchants. Rather than treat them as an inherently lower class, they were invited and rewarded, and trade encouraged. The Yuan government partook in this with the conquest of the southern Chinese coastline, establishing a bureau of maritime trade at the major port of Quanzhou. The bureau not only oversaw and taxed the trade in and out of Quanzhou, but sought to actively encourage it, while settling foreign traders there. Contacts were made across the region, from the Southeast Asian coast through the Philippines, Indonesia, including Java and Sumatra, to India and the Iranian coastline. There is evidence for South Indian-style Hindu temples with Tamil transcriptions in Quanzhou from this period, a significant Muslim population, and resettled Persians who called the city Zaytan, by which Marco Polo recorded the name. Speaking of polo, there is also evidence for an Italian trading community in Quanzhou. It was an entry point for the world. It was the port that Ibn Battuta, during his journeys in the 1340s, arrived at. The Yuan dynasty had a keen interest in trade and sought to extend their control over it throughout the region, at the same time extending the Mongols' heavenly mandate to rule the whole of the world.
Can you guess where I'm
With these considerations, Kublai Khan increased diplomatic missions across the seas of southern Asia, from Malabar to Sri Lanka, ordering the monarchs and peoples across the sea to submit to the Great Khan. As it was an old tradition to send a yearly tribute for the privilege of trading with China, most regional states already undertook a nominal submission in order to have greater access to Chinese ports. While traditional Chinese dynasties were generally content to accept the trade and maintain the image of themselves as the center of the world, even if they did not exercise actual authority in these states, the Mongols were often not quite as lenient. To be a vassal to the Great Khan meant the potential of making all resources and people available to the Khan's desires, measured through census and Mongol-appointed overseers. When Kublai sent his diplomatic missions over the seas, they often were sent not just to reaffirm or increase the tribute, but to increase the extent to which these overseas monarchs needed to comply with the will of the House of Chinggis Khan. On one such mission, an envoy named Mengqi arrived in the court of Kartanagara, the king of Tumapel, sometime in the 1280s. Katanagara had been the king since the 1260s and had shown himself a haughty individual and firm adherent to Tantric Buddhism. Since his ascension, he had expanded his kingdom over eastern Sumatra and most of Java. By all accounts, Katanagara was quite keen to solidify his control of trade and spice routes, but much less keen on sharing it with the distant Khan. In the various sources, after feeling offended by the envoy Meng Qi and his demands, Katanagara either insulted him, branded his face with a hot iron, cut off his nose, or outright killed him. In either case, he had committed a grievous insult on an envoy of the Great Khan, which, as you may have heard, was not something taken lightly. Katanagara's calculation was likely a simple one. He did not want to increase the share of tribute sent to China for the privilege of trading, but still wanted that Chinese trade. It was a reasonable assumption that the island of Java was well outside the range of an actual attack from China, leaving him physically secure from any repercussions. Once tensions had cooled, Katanagara could hypothetically send an apology mission and resume trade. These were reasonable assumptions, but Kublai Khan was not feeling reasonable. By the later 1280s, the deaths of Kublai's closest confidant, his wife Chabi, chosen heir Jingim, and his most important advisors, as well as alcoholism and depression, had clouded his judgment. Kublai's earliest campaigns against the Dali kingdom and Song dynasty were marked by thorough preparation and intelligence gathering, taking advantage of weaknesses within the enemy to bring the final victory. Decades later, isolated and depressed, surrounded by yes-men who lacked the ability to stand up to him, and desperate for victory, Kublai had come to rely on throwing manpower at a problem, hoping tactical success would lead automatically to strategic victories. Kublai's knowledge of Java was minimal, but he did not care. The ruler of some island in the sea had no right to insult the master of the world. Thus, Kublai ordered an attack upon the kingdom of Tumapel to bring Katanagara to heel. At least this is the understanding from the Chinese language sources of the Yuan and Ming dynasties. In the medieval Javanese and Balinese sources, the incident with Meng Qi the envoy is unmentioned. Instead, Kublai was a friend of the minister, Madura Wiraraja, who requested Kublai provide military assistance to the royal family of Tumapel. In this version, Katanagara was usurped by a man named Jayakatwang, and Kublai's forces quite respectfully came, defeated the usurper, placed the rightful heir, Katanagara's son-in-law, Raden Vijaya, on the throne, and took in exchange only a beautiful princess for Kublai to marry. Generally speaking, most reconstructions rely on the Chinese account, though the Javanese sources are interesting for how they justify and depict the Yuan presence. Regardless, an invasion fleet and army were prepared in 1292. 20,000 men, mainly from southern China, were mobilized aboard 1,000 vessels. This army was led by the former Song commander Gao Xing, the navy by a Uyghur named Yikmis, and all were under the overall command of a Mongol named Shibi. The commanders prepared carefully, having learned from the disastrous naval assaults on Japan and Dai Viet. They had on board a year's supply of grain and 40,000 ounces of silver to purchase more supplies. The commanders met with Kublai himself before their departure. The Khan of Khans told Shibi to leave naval matters to Yikmi's expertise, and that they must proclaim on their arrival that they were not an invasion force, but merely there to punish Katanagara for harming a Yuan envoy. If true, it may reflect an understanding that facing battle in unknown lands against a foe they did not know was not ideal. The strategy, it seems, was merely to overawe the Javanese. The mere threat of their presence anticipated to be enough to earn a victory. The fleet set out in the winter of 1292–93, making a short stopover in Champa, now paying tribute and at peace with the Mongols. There, officers were dispatched on diplomatic missions to Lamori, Samudra, Perlak and Malayu in Sumatra, seeking tribute and submission. By March 1293, the fleet was off the coast of Java and preparing to make landfall. It was decided to send a diplomatic force ahead of the main fleet to convince Katanagara to submit and avoid having to make landfall at all. If there was no progress on the diplomatic front in a week, then the fleet was to follow up as a show of force. The diplomatic mission found no success, for matters had changed considerably in Java by the time of their arrival. The haughty king of Tumapel, Kartanagara, was dead, slain by his vassal Jayakatong of Gilang, based in the city of Kadiri. Kartanagara's son-in-law, Raden Vijaya, based in Majapahit, was resisting him, and the Yuan arrived in the midst of a civil war. A week after the envoys were sent, the armada landed at Taban, where part of the army, under Gaoxing and Yikmis, disembarked and marched to Pachakan. The rest of the army was to follow aboard the ships under the command of Tukadege, sailing through the Straits of Madura to rendezvous with the land force. At Pachakan, Jayakatong's navy blocked the Brantes River, but made no move against the Yuan. The Yuan commanders landed and set up a banquet, inviting the Javanese to come over and discuss terms. No response was made by the Javanese, and after a while, the Yuan fleet and army advanced. Jayakatong's navy retreated before them, and after garrisoning Pachakan, the Yuan forces made their way inland along the Brantes. As they moved inland, they were greeted by envoys of Raden Vijaya, begging Yuan help. The young prince only had a small force, and Jayakatong of Gilang's army was on its way to attack Vijaya's base at Majapahit. In exchange, Vijaya would submit to the Great Khan. Seeing supporting Vijaya as the key to gaining the submission of Java, Yikmis ordered Gaoxing to take a part of the army and intercept Jayakatong, while Yikmis took the rest of the force to reinforce Majapahit. Jayakatong managed to evade Gaoxing and reached Majapahit, only to find Yikmis had already assembled his forces to meet Jayakatong's tired troops. After a night of standoff, the next day, Gaoxing arrived with the rest of the Yuan troops, and altogether they drove off Jayakatong's army. Raden Vijaya once again promised his total submission to the Great Khan if the Yuan forces helped him defeat Jayakatong for good, and after providing them maps, a week later they set off for Jayakatong's capital at Kadiri. The Yuan moved in 3 columns, the fleet on the Brantes River under Tukadege, with Gaoxing and Yikmis taking their forces up either bank, while behind them travelled a large force from Majapahit under Raden Vijaya. The army made good time and reached Kadiri within a few days, finding Jayakatong prepared with a large force. The next day, until the morning from early afternoon, Jayakatong's force advanced 3 times, and 3 times they were repulsed with heavy losses by the arms of the Yuan dynasty and Majapahit. By the end of the day, Jayakatong's army broke, fleeing across the river or into Kadiri with Jayakatong. An assault on the city followed, and by nightfall, Jayakatong surrendered. For the next week, the Yuan were the masters of Java. Raden Vijaya's promised submission now had come. For this, he desired to return to Majapahit with a small unarmed Yuan escort to properly witness his formal submission. While that force departed for Majapahit, Shibi sent most of the army back to Pachakan, while he stayed in Kadiri with a small force, thinking he had handily conquered Java for the Khan. Once Raden Vijaya saw that the Yuan troops had let their guard down, at the end of the day he killed the Yuan escorts who followed him back to Majapahit, rallied his armies, and urged the people of Java to repel the foreign invaders. Only narrowly did Shibi escape the trap for him at Kadiri. He fought his way back to Pachakan, losing up to 3,000 men. Back aboard the ships, the commanders argued over whether to counterattack or to retreat, ultimately choosing the latter. Not knowing the country, outnumbered, and unlikely to find local support, they understood further combat would likely only have one disastrous outcome. With that, Shibi ordered a withdrawal back to home port. While they did bring back some trophies, maps of Java, population registers, spices, gold, silver, rhino horn, and prisoners, this did not offset the costs of the campaign. Not as disastrous as the invasions of Japan or Vietnam, even this tactically well-executed campaign could not be turned into a strategic victory, and resulted in a humiliating retreat. Kublai was furious, punishing the commanders, stripping them of a third of their property, and rewarding them with 50 blows from the rod. Once Kublai Khan died in early 1294, there was no stomach to avenge that defeat, or those others suffered in Southeast Asia. By contrast, Raden Vijaya established a powerful empire based in Majapahit that came to rule most of modern Indonesia and Malaysia, founded in part with Mongol assistance. By the end of the 1290s, after Kublai's death, Vijaya sent missions to the Yuan dynasty to resume valuable trade contacts. Despite their reputation for destruction across much of Eurasia, in the Javanese Chronicle there is but a single reference to the Mongols destroying towns and sending people running in flight, reflective of the hope for a less destructive campaign, perhaps helping with the memory of the invasion becoming that of Kublai coming to assist his friends in exchange for a beautiful princess. It was a rather different view than their forces earned in many other places. In the end, Java successfully defended against the Mongols with perhaps the most minimal amount of destruction to their own lands. Through guile, they took advantage of a well-prepared but hesitant Yuan army, and they were thereby able to not only use Mongol troops to their advantage, but inflict upon them a defeat with relatively little bloodshed. In many ways, it was the most effective, least cost-intensive, and most beneficial resistance put up by any of the states we have looked at over this series. Our series on how various peoples defended against the Mongols will continue in the near future, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible.
Oh, here we go. Anybody watching or talking, don't look like we are. What up? Twitch, Kick, Yo-Yo, YouTubes. Nope. Facebook, nope. Alright, let's go.
Previously in this series, we talked about the resistance against the Mongols mounted by Central Europeans, Ruthenians, Mamluks and Chinese. But of all the states to put up a lengthy resistance to the Mongol war machine in the 13th century, perhaps the relative success of the Koreans is the most surprising. For 40 years, the peninsula staved off conquest by the greatest military of the Middle Ages. In today's episode, we will discuss the lengthy Mongol-Korean War. This video is made available for free thanks to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons, who get 2 documentaries per week not available to the public. We've got a growing collection featuring the First Punic War, the history of Prussia, the Italian Unification Wars, and a review of the classic text Xenophon's Anabasis. We're now covering the Russo-Japanese War and Albigensian Crusades, not to mention our massive Pacific War week-by-week coverage, and a massive pool of other projects. All this is made for and with generous donations from our backers. So if you're enjoying our content and want to see more and support the cause of history, consider becoming a YouTube member or patron. You'll also get early access to public content, a spot in our lively Discord server, and behind-the-scenes info and goodies. We rely on our backers to support our growing team pumping out these videos, so thank you to everyone already involved, and we hope you'll consider joining in too. The 13th century Kingdom of Koryo, ruled by the House of Wang, had successfully resisted previous northern invasions by the Khitan Liao and Jurchen Jin, who had also fought as horse archers like the Mongols. Generally, the Koreans entered into beneficial tribute relationships with these states in order to maintain peace. After 1170, the Korean kings were reduced to figureheads, while military dictators acted as the de facto rulers of Korea. General Choe Chung-hon took power in the 1190s, beginning the military dynasty that would rule over Korea throughout the Mongol conquests. The 1211 Mongol invasion of the Jin Empire, Koryo's northern neighbor, brought unease to the peninsula. The Korean ambassador to the Jin was killed in the fighting, while new breakaway states and Jin deserters began to harass Korea's border at the Yalu River. In autumn 1216, several thousand rebelling Khitan horsemen blazed through the frontier. Skilled horse archers, the Khitans drove deep into Korea, menacing the capital, modern Kaesong. With effort, the Koreans halted their advance. Unexpectedly, in the winter of 1218, the Mongols sent some 30,000 troops into Korea with a simple message to the Koreans. They would crush the rebel Khitans. The Koreans would provide troops and supplies to assist with this, and then would pay tribute to the Great Khan. After a brief delay in answering, the Koreans acquiesced, sending 1,000 picked troops and 1,000 bushels of rice. The rebel Khitans were crushed, and Korea began sending tribute to the Mongols in 1219. Korea's first Mongol experience was relatively peaceful. Though forced to send tribute, their cities had not suffered. The dictator Choi Chong-hon's advancing age, failing health, and desire to pass his rule onto his son stopped him from provocating. A keen observer, he had judged the danger of this new foe, expecting the relationship would differ little from Liao or Jin's tribute demands. Choi Chong-hon died in late 1219, and was succeeded by his oldest son, Choi-yu. A military man like his father and decisive leader, Choi-yu helmed Koryo for the next 2 decades. Choi-yu detested the Mongols' demands, especially for valuable otter skins, desired for their water-resistant properties. While Genghis Khan was absent in Central Asia, his chief commander Makali had been left to maintain pressure on the Jin dynasty. With Makali's death in 1223 and a reduction in the Mongol military presence, the political situation changed dramatically. While the Jin made peace with their neighbors, a Mongol vassal kingdom in Manchuria, ruled by Pushanwanu, declared independence. He sought to ally with Koryo, which declined, but made their own moves. In 1225, the chief Mongol envoy to Korea mysteriously disappeared while transporting the annual tribute north. The Koreans insisted it was bandits, but the Mongols put the blame square on Koryo. Ugade Khan was enthroned in 1229 and demanded both Pushanwanu and the Koreans be punished. Initially, the new Khan demanded Koryo aid in an attack against Wanu. With the failure of the Koreans to comply, Ugade ordered an invasion of the peninsula, the first of 6 Mongol invasions. Led by Sartak Kochi, the army crossed the Yalu River in autumn 1231. The attack was overwhelming. Koryo's armies were annihilated in the field, and Kaesong surrounded. Yet there was notable resistance at a few fortified cities, especially Kuju. Famed for a victory over the Khitans in 1018, in late 1231 through early 1232, under the command of Pak So, the city withstood weeks of assault. The most famous event occurred early in the siege. The southern wall of the city was defended by Kim Kyong-son and a skilled unit of Pyolcho, translated as Defense Command Patrol, Extraordinary Watches, or Night Patrol. These were local troops from outside the regular army, an elite militia specializing in guerrilla warfare. Sending most of the unit inside the city, Kim Kyong-son led a group of 12 picked men before the south gate. Telling them not to think of their lives and accept death as their fate, Kim and his men withstood 4 or 5 Mongol charges, girding the city to further resistance. Attacks were launched on the walls day and night. The Mongols pushed carts of dry grass and wood to the gates to burn them, only to be destroyed by Korean catapults. A tower built before the walls to protect sappers was destroyed when the Koreans dug holes through their own walls to pour molten iron onto it. 15 large catapults were driven off by the Korean counter-artillery. Scaling ladders were toppled by Korean polearms. Bundles of sticks, soaked allegedly in human fat, set aflame and hurled into the city, could not be put out with water, but the crafty Koreans smothered them with mud and earth. Another catapult team made 50 breaches in the walls, which the defenders filled as they were made. After a month of terrible destruction but no success, the siege was lifted, the Mongols declaring the city was protected by heaven. Military ruler Choi-yu came to terms with the Mongols in January 1232, and was so frustrated that Kuju had continued to resist that he wanted to have its commanders, Pak So and Kim Kyong-son, executed, fearing that their defiance would provoke Mongol retaliation. Here the Mongols interceded, saying, "Although he went contrary to our orders, he is a loyal subject of yours. We're not going to kill him now that you've already pledged peace with us. Would it be proper to kill the loyal subjects of all your cities?" Still, Koryo had submitted to Sartak Kochi in the first month of 1232. The tribute demands were massive. 20,000 horses, 20,000 otter skins, slaves, royal hostages, and clothing for 1 million men were demanded, alongside gold, silver, and other treasures. Appointing overseers, Sartak withdrew his forces, considering the peninsula conquered. The Koreans were less keen to comply. The demands were onerous. While Koryo sent much in gifts, it was unwilling to send royal hostages, and could barely produce 1,000 otterskins. By the summer of 1232, Choiyu moved king and court from Kaesong to Kanghwa Island under naval protection. Mongol officials in Korea were murdered, and the peninsula was in open revolt. Sartak returned in the fall of 1232, blazing a trail of destruction across the country's northern half until he was killed during a siege by a Buddhist monk turned archer, Kim Yun-hu. On Sartak's death, the Mongol army withdrew. As Choiyu ably predicted, the Mongols' lack of navy would stop them from being able to get the royal court into their hands by force. The Mongols were not done with Korea. The defection of one Korean commander, Hong Pogwan, gave them control of the land north of Pyongyang, which Hong was made the overseer of. The next attack came in summer of 1235, after the conquest of North China. This campaign, led by Tangut Ba'atar, was hugely destructive. With the assistance of Hong Pogwan, by winter of 1236, he had penetrated some 470 kilometers into Korea. The Koreans could not field armies against them, and alternative strategies were developed to respond. Just as the court had fled to Kanghwa Island, most of the population outside of fortified settlements fled to coastal islands or mountain refuges to escape Mongol riders. Offensives were limited to guerrilla warfare, Pyulcho units launching surprise night raids, ambushes through mountain passes, and striking small parties. Hitting quickly and hard and using local terrain, these small units were more mobile than even the Mongols. It was a frustrating way of war for the Mongols, and destruction increased when they got frustrated. Fortified settlements were left to fend for themselves, and when they did fall, the destruction was horrific. The countryside was ravaged, and the death toll was horrendous. The guerrilla tactics harassed but could not stop the Mongols, who could not bring the country to submission. Korean defections to the Mongols were enormous. By winter 1238, the Korean court was willing to come to talks with the Mongols to halt the destruction. As the Koreans feared, Mongol demands were stiff. Alongside the expected tribute, the Mongols required a census and for the Korean king Kojong to present himself to the Mongol court at that time. For the military ruler Choiyu, this presented an issue. His legitimacy rested on his control of the king. Mongol demands would remove him from power. Peace on Mongol terms could not be accepted as long as the Choes wanted to remain in control. For 2 years, the Koreans made excuses not to send the king until a distant relation was made up to be the crown prince and sent to the Mongol capital of Karakoram in 1241. The Mongols found out about the deception 14 years later. By then, he was a loyal member of the Mongol court and even married the daughter of Great Khan Mung-Ke. With the royal hostage and resumption of tribute, Choiyu achieved a 6-year truce. The Mongols still wanted the royal court to return to the mainland though, and their envoys grew ever more insistent on the matter. Choiyu spent the next 6 years building elaborate fortifications on Kanghwa Island and readying militia units, while consecrating Buddhist projects, like the Tripitaka Koreana, to secure heavenly favors. In autumn 1247, the new Khan, Guyuk, ordered another attack under Amukan and Hong Pogwan. Again, the countryside was abandoned for coastal islands and mountain fortresses. Guerrilla attacks were launched, and the northern half of the peninsula was desolated. The deaths of Khan Guyuk in summer 1248 and Choiyu in winter 1249 brought a relative calm. Choiyu was succeeded by his son, Chuehang, not the equal of his father or grandfather. More arrogant and hasty than his father, he struggled to maneuver the complicated politics of Koryo and Mongol attacks, and within months he faced coup attempts. In 1251, Mung-Ke was confirmed as Great Khan. Again, envoys demanded the Korean king visit the Mongol court and abandon Kanghwa Island. Again, excuses were made. King Kojong was too old and sickly for such a trip. but the Koreans suggested sending the crown prince again, while preparing for the expected invasion.
Forgot to delete.
By 1252, Mongke sent Prince Yeku into Korea in August 1243 alongside Amukan and Hongpogwan. Mongol envoys announced that King Kojong had 6 days to comply and meet Mongol representatives on the mainland. Though the king actually met with Mongol envoys on the straits across from the island, it achieved nothing. Once more, Mongol forces were unleashed on the peninsula, while the people fled to their hideouts. Pyolcho raids attacked Mongol parties, and Mongols destroyed the cities which fell to them. Yeku was held up and fell ill during the long siege of Cheongju, ably defended by Kim Yun-hu, the same Buddhist monk who had killed Sartak some 20 years prior. Ultimately, Mongke recalled Yeku before the end of the year due to his feuding with another prince. Amukan and Hongpogwan continued the campaign for a few more weeks, organizing a brief effort at amphibious warfare. 7 captured Korean ships landed Mongol troops on Kal Island in early 1254, to no great result. Amukan pulled the troops back in spring, returning in August with reinforcements under Jalayitai Kochi, with more demands for submission that went unheeded. Early in the summer of 1255, Jalayitai and Amukan fell back to the northern border. By then, aside from years of destruction and abandonment of farmland, the peninsula was also in the midst of an ongoing drought. In the first year of Jalayitai's command in Korea, an estimated 206,800 persons were taken captive. The suffering was horrific. Jalayitai's forces attacked again in autumn 1255, beginning a shipbuilding program. Frustrated with the continued resistance, the Mongols were considering assaulting the well-defended Kanghua Island. A sense of Jalayitai's frustration is evident in his response to the Korean envoys in mid-1256. The envoys came asking for peace and Mongol withdrawal, to which Jalayitai, incensed with Pyolcho attacks in the night, snapped, "If you desire peace and friendship, then why do you kill our soldiers in great numbers?" Jalayitai's withdrawal in the autumn of 1256 was no respite. Famine gripped even Kanghua Island. When Jalayitai returned in the spring, it must have been apparent that the Choe's were hanging on by a thread. Choe Hang soon died, succeeded by his son Chue Wei, who proved a very poor choice. His attempts to win favor by grants of food to the populace and court did not offset bad advisors enriching themselves and his own poor decisions. Alienating just about everyone in the court, the pressure of the situation finally led to a coup. Officers led by Kim In-jun assaulted Choe's palace in May 1258. Chue Wei tried to escape over the walls, but was too fat to get himself over. Caught by the assassins, Chue Wei's death ended 6 decades of Chue military rule in Korea. Gaining the support of the elderly Kojong and handing out the wealth of the Choe's, Kim In-jun made himself the new military governor. However, his position was much weaker than the Choe's had been, and he still refused to submit to the Mongols. Mongol envoys, who arrived in the summer of 1258, brought threats that they would storm Kanghua Island, and in August, Jalayitai received further reinforcements. Refusal to supply either the crown prince or the king was met with unchecked destruction across the Korean peninsula. If the royal court did not come to them, the Mongols would impose direct rule. No matter how bloody the Pyolcho attacks were, they could not stop the Mongols. Resistance broke in 1259. Revolts against military rule began across the country, and towns and cities surrendered on the arrival of the Mongols rather than continue fighting. With food supplies exhausted, their military forces ground nearly to dust, in the spring of 1259, a peace deal was reached. The crown prince, Wang Chun, was to travel to the Mongol court as a royal hostage. The court moved back to the mainland, and the defenses of Kanghua were demolished. Kim In-jun was not removed, but his power was considerably lesser than that of the Choe's. Organized Koryo resistance to the Mongol Empire was over. In May 1259, Prince Wang Chun set out for the imperial court, and inadvertently became the first foreign ruler to recognize Kublai as the next great Khan of the empire. In turn, Kublai provided Wang Chun with an armed escort to return to Korea and be installed as the new king, as the venerable Kojong had died in July 1259. Kojong had reigned through the entire Mongol-Korean War, and fittingly, he died only weeks after it ended. Wang Chon, known better by his temple name, Wonjong, proved a loyal vassal to Kublai Khan, marrying his son and eventual successor to one of Kublai's daughters. Military rule in Korea ended in 1270 after a series of assassinations and rebellions, and the Korean court finally returned to the mainland. With that, Koryo was a fully incorporated client kingdom. The king ruled in earnest, though with Mongol backing. When briefly ousted by a coup, Kublai's forces came in and reinstalled him. Yet Mongol demands upon Korea did not grow any less burdensome. Wonjong had to mobilize the Koreans for another war, this time fighting alongside the Mongols. Korean ships, food supplies and men were needed by Kublai Khan against the island of Japan, which had spurned his demands for submission. Korea was to be a launch pad for the first Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274. More videos on this topic are on the way, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button to see them. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive videos. Join the ranks of patrons and YouTube members via the link in the description or by pressing the button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, join our private Discord, and much more. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one. Our series on how to defend against the Mongols has shown how all manner of peoples around the world found ways to fight against attacks by Mongol armies in the 13th and 14th centuries. In the final part of this series, we will examine the most pressing question of all. After the breakup of the Mongol Empire, how did the Mongols defend themselves against attacks from other Mongol armies?
I put out of order. I did a chapter out of order. So what happened here?
In many retellings of the Mongol conquests, the Chinese are often presented as being immediately crushed by the hooves of Mongol horses. Yet such a presentation ignores the many centuries of combat between the Middle Kingdom and the Horsemen of the Great Steppe, and the fact that it took the Mongol Empire over 60 years to conquer China. Continuing our series on defending against the Mongols, we will offer a brief overview of the means by which Chinese dynasties fought against northern nomads. Hey history fans, quick channel update before we jump to the video. As we've said previously, most of the money earned by this channel is being reinvested into more better researched and better made videos, as well as our Wizards and Warriors and Cold War channels. We prefer to rely on our kind patrons and YouTube members, and not sponsors. No one likes excessive sponsorships. However, right now having sponsors is a necessity. Still, we vow that as soon as we get to 10,000 patrons and YouTube members, we'll stop adding sponsorships to our videos. We have a great team and we want to be able to continue paying them living or competitive wages and not cut back on production. So until the algorithm is more favorable and we can release more than 3 videos per week, extra videos that our team has created will be posted as YouTube member and Patreon exclusives. 1 or 2 videos per week will be exclusively available for our YouTube members and patrons, whose ranks you can join by pressing the button below the video or becoming a patron via the link in the description. Don't worry though, these videos will not be from one of the ongoing series and will be either standalone episodes or belong to a new series. For just $5 you can support our work, watch exclusive videos, there are 10 now and more are added every week, get early access to free videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind the scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and for your kind support. We wouldn't be able to do what we love without you. When Chinggis Khan invaded North China's Jin dynasty in 1211, this was the latest, if most dramatic, round in a series going well back over a millennium. When his armies crossed the Gobi Desert, much of northern China had already been under the rule of nomadic and semi-nomadic horse archer conquest dynasties since the 10th century. From active defense to dissuasion and everything in between, all sorts of tactics and strategies had been employed, with varying levels of success, to stymie the advance of the nomads. These relationships were not uniform, but we can observe some general trends. Firstly was the difficulty for Chinese armies to operate in the open steppes of Mongolia. Nomads subsisted off their herds, who survived off the veritable ocean of grassland. For Chinese armies, reliant on baggage trains and products of farmland, the steppes seemed a desert. Additionally, more mobile nomadic armies generally avoided direct conflict with Chinese invaders, dragging them along as their supplies wore thin and striking when they weakened, or dispersing utterly and denying confrontation at all. Though these challenges could be met by skilled commanders, like the Yongle Emperor of the Ming dynasty, for lesser generals it led to humiliating disasters. With that said, let us look at the means employed against the nomads. It's best to deal first with the most famous, the Great Wall of China. Though Chinese border fortifications go back before even the first imperial unification by the Qin, the Great Wall of China is the single structure that has survived history. China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, constructed an infamous long wall on the state's northern border. However, that wall, made of pounded earth and layers of reeds, long since eroded. Rather, different dynasties in China built a number of walls in different places and maintained them for short periods. The iconic winding structure that stands today was built by the Ming dynasty during the 16th century, some 400 years after the Mongol conquest of China. In the time of Chinggis Khan, there were border walls constructed by the Jin dynasty, which ran through flatlands in Inner Mongolia, consisting of low rammed earth walls and ditches. But the tribes manning these fortifications submitted to Chinggis Khan and allowed him free passage. Border walls were neither the first nor last line of defense. They served 3 primary purposes. First, dissuading nomadic attacks along a certain route. Second, a signaling service to alert of enemy attacks and give time for garrisons behind the wall to mobilize for the threat. And third, control over border trade. Chinese dynasties often restricted the sale of weapons to the nomads, and building their border walls could, in theory, control this trade or funnel it to a select few choke points for tax purposes. Over-reliance on walls as pure defensive structures were usually signs of the dynasty's weakness, as occurred in the late Ming period after the humiliation of the Tumu crisis in 1449, when Mongols captured the Ming Emperor and besieged Beijing. After this, the Ming began the expansion of the Great Wall to first protect the route to Beijing from the north, and gradually almost the entire northern frontier. Generally, the actual first line of defense against nomadic attacks was prevention. That is, dissuading them diplomatically, or encouraging the nomads to fight each other. a common tool of persuasion was extensive gift-giving, essentially a sort of Danegeld to buy off the nomads before their attack. Though more than one court official bemoaned this as humiliation, it was considerably cheaper than an actual invasion. While sometimes it is claimed these treaties intended to civilize and weaken the martial ability of the nomads with Chinese culture, there isn't great support for this. For nearly the first century of its existence, China's illustrious Han dynasty had to recognize the Xiongnu rulers in Mongolia as equal brothers who were owed annual tributes known as the Heqin treaties, sending mammoth amounts of silk alongside grain, princesses, and other treasures. As a means to civilize the barbarians, they rather failed and appears a retroactive justification. The Han had more success against the Xiongnu by encouraging revolt among its vassals and princes and strengthening its rivals, coupled with a few well-placed campaigns of its own. The most effective means of defense was preventing nomadic unity through divide and rule tactics. Over the 10th to early 12th centuries, Eastern Mongolia and parts of North China were controlled by the Liao dynasty, which was ruled by the Khitans, a people related to the Mongols. After their
What's going on, anybody? Everybody watching? How you doing, Kick? What up, Twitch? What up, YouTube? Nobody on YouTube? What's up, Facebook? And X. Okay. A few more minutes, then we'll call it for the day. Go back and do some more audio. Yeah, man, I gotta figure this, make sure I don't mess up this, recording, the order, because I'm pretty sure I messed it up, and that's why I had to do all that, but it shouldn't be too bad this next time. And then I'll have this after. Yeah, I think I'm back on track. Yeah, it's just those couple chapters I messed up. Well, how much longer on this vidya? Yeah, let's play.
Their conquest of Mongolia, they established garrisons, forts, and towns across Mongolia, and ruled through what is called a dual administration, using customary law of Khitans and other nomads in the steppe, and Tang dynasty laws for its Chinese and Bohai population. In addition to garrisons and a more familiar law, the Liao dynasty also reorganized the population of the Mongolian plateau into a number of bu, which can be translated as unit, department, or tribe. This saw the removal of existing nomad leaders and their replacement with loyalists to the Liao dynasty, each given an allotted region to call their own, while also serving as units for taxation and administrative needs. This method kept the Liao secure on their steppe border, though less so on their northeastern border, where the Jurchen people in Manchuria eventually rose up, toppled the Liao, declared the Jin dynasty, and conquered North China. However, the Jin did not take Mongolia, and with the passing of the Liao garrisons, the steppes were in a power vacuum. Groups like the Keriid, who had not been under direct Liao control, grew to become the most powerful, while others, like the nascent Mongols, ruled by the grandfathers of Chinggis Khan, were becoming a nuisance. Here, the Jin employed a very different technique than the Liao. They made the peoples along their borders their vassals, who manned the lines of fortifications the Jin built in the steppes just south of the Gobi, and provided titles, luxury goods, beneficial trade ties, and military support to those specific groups. For the second half of the 12th century, this was chiefly the Tatars in eastern Mongolia who acted as the enforcers of Jin interests, and stopped any other group from becoming too powerful. And when the Tatars grew too rebellious, the Jin switched their support to another people, who would then push down the Tatars. In the 1190s, this was a Keriid Khan named To'oril, and a rising Mongol warlord named Temujin. Unfortunately for the Jin, while their attention was distracted by internal troubles and war with the southern Song dynasty, this warlord in the north went on to subjugate the nomads. In 1206, he declared the Mongol Empire and took a new title, Chinggis Khan. Soon after, he took his new nation on the offensive against the Jin. What did the Jin do to confront the Mongol attack? As already noted, the Jin's border guard largely submitted to the new Mongol emperor. Yet the Jin themselves were no meek force, and arguably held the single greatest military in the world at that time. At their core were the Jurchen horse archers and fearsome heavy cavalry, supported by Khitan horsemen and thousands upon thousands of Chinese infantry and crossbowmen. As the North China Plain is divided from the Mongol steppes by the Yan Mountains, the Jin defense focused on the select navigable passes through them, which were guarded by strong gates and towers. The Jin reinforced these gates, spreading caltrops and ditches before them. Fierce fighting followed, but the Jin were overconfident. The Mongols relied on deserters, spies and scouts to inform them of Jin positions, allowing them to find unguarded passes and exploit weakness. To overcome the Jin forts while lacking their own siege tools, the Mongols employed feigned retreats in abundance, and haughty or revenge-seeking Jin defenders fell for it with startling regularity. The Jin were hampered by poor leadership. Within the first 2 years of the war with the Mongols, the Jin's offensive and political capabilities were ground down. A coup in 1213 and the new emperor abandoning the central capital of Zhengdu heralded this. Soon after arriving in the new capital of Kaiping, the new Jin emperor launched a large invasion of the Song dynasty to the south. The further division of these strange Jin forces weakened their ability at organized resistance. Many cities were simply left to their own devices against the Khan's horsemen. With the accession of a new Jin emperor in 1224, and the absence of the main Mongol armies in Khwarezm, and peace between Jin, Song and the Tangut Kingdom, efforts were made to better prepare against the Mongols. The Yellow River now stood as the primary barrier between the Jin state and the Mongol Empire, and the few routes around or over it were given extra garrisons and reinforced. This also saw the creation of a new army to better combat the Mongols. Called the Loyal and Filial Army, this was an army specially made for anti-Mongol activities. Composed of captives and deserters from the Mongol army, it was a mixed force of northern Chinese, Tangut, Uyghur, Naiman and Kipchak origin, fighting as mounted horse archers like the Mongols. Paid triple that of regular soldiers and armed with fire weapons, this became the vanguard of the new Jin offensives to reclaim their lands. Shortly after the enthronement of the new Great Khan, Ugade, news came that this army inflicted several serious defeats on the Mongols. One of these was even against a rising Mongol general named Subedai, whom a furious Ugade nearly removed permanently from command in his wrath. The Jin were at their most effective when they fought the closest to the Mongols. However, this final effort was too little too late. By 1234, in alliance with the Song dynasty, the Mongols crushed the last of the Jin resistance. Soon after, the Mongols and Song were also at war. Here, the Song frontier differed from the Jin experience. The Song had fought with armies of horsemen back to Khitan invasions, when one of their strategies had been planting a belt of forests along the frontier to break up Khitan cavalry formations. The Song territory was less forgiving to cavalry, both hillier and damper, cut by many rivers, marshes, wetlands and rice fields that could rot the hooves of horses and spread disease among the northerners. The Song dynasty's modern reputation for military incompetence is undeserved, though. The resistance of the southern Chinese was some of the fiercest the Mongols would face. The Song's large cities were protected by mighty walls and wide moats. Border forts and walls guarded major routes, while the Yangtze River served as an immense natural barrier, patrolled by the Song Navy. The Song employed all manners of defensive weaponry, from counter-artillery catapults and giant crossbows, fire lances and bombs, to well-armoured infantry protected by long spears and stout shields. The Song court, if far from ideal, still managed to produce some skilled leadership, most famously Jia Sidao, and managed a surprising degree of flexibility. While the Mongols often deeply penetrated Song borders, rapid mobilization of several Song armies made it difficult for Mongol gains to be held, and often these cities were retaken soon after the Mongols passed. In Sichuan province, there was fierce resistance in over 40 years of almost continuous warfare, which bogged down Great Khan Mungke and cost his life from infected waters in a siege, while Song defenders killed his top generals. The Song defense was based around employing the maximum amount of friction against the Mongols, hoping that their tenacity would eventually wear them down. It proved, however, a misplaced strategy. Courtly infighting and the arrogance of Chancellor Jia Sidao struggled to deal with the economic cost of the decades-long war. Court expenses didn't end, as more and more finance and manpower was thrown into the conflict. Despite its immense population, the Song struggled to field enough troops against the Mongols, who were mobilizing not just Mongols and men from across northern China, but from across Asia. Turkic horsemen, siege engineers from the Ilkhanate, and shipbuilders from Korea were all compiled for Kublai Khan's conquest of the Song. The vigor with which the Mongols approached the Song War outstripped that which the Song could produce, and finally, after tremendous effort, the last of their holdouts fell in 1279. The expulsion of the Mongol Yuan dynasty from China in 1368 did not end Mongol attacks, and the new Ming dynasty had to relearn how to defend against them. The early Ming period saw invasions of Mongolia, some led by the Yongle Emperor himself. This disrupted life in the steppe, destabilized the northern Yuan, and won a number of victories, but never resulted in conquest or definite gains. Under the Yongle Emperor's watch, the Ming encouraged rivalries between the Western Mongols, the Oirat, and the Yuan remnants, sending supplies and titles to both parties, helping create a division in Mongol society and never letting either become too powerful. But the Yongle Emperor's death in 1424 ended the most effective campaigns and political meddling, which allowed the Oirat, under their leaders Tokhun and his son Esen Taishi, to dominate Mongolia by the end of the 1430s. The few Ming armies sent against him were crushed, as Esen Taishi campaigned from Manchuria to Central Asia. The Ming decided to instead cut off trade with Mongolia entirely. In response, Esen Taishi began raiding the Ming border. When the young, inexperienced Ming Emperor tried to face him in battle directly, Esen Taishi captured him in 1449 and laid siege to Beijing. In reaction to this humiliating failure, the Ming went on the defensive, beginning their Great Wall along their northern border. Even still, northern Yuan armies penetrated the frontier, and in 1550, Altan Khan laid siege to Beijing again. The greatest protection the late Ming received was the breakup of this renewed Mongol unity, and the growth of rival aristocrats in Mongolia itself as the Khan's influence waned. This precipitated the expansion of the descendants of the Jurchen, the Manchu, under Nahadzi and his Huang Taiji, who managed to diplomatically isolate the last remaining Chinggisid monarch in Mongolia, Ligdan Khan. With Ligdan Khan's death in 1634, his son submitted to the Manchu and their newly established Qing dynasty. With the young Khan as their subject, the Manchu managed to take submission through threat, force, or diplomacy of almost all the Mongols. Here, the Qing employed the actions of the Khitan Liao. Mongol political units were broken up and reassigned to Qing loyalists to make a new aristocracy, and thus dismantle the network that would previously have led revolts. Mongol horsemen thus accompanied the Qing in the conquest of China in the coming years. Though sporadic Mongol revolts broke out, they were too few and disunited against the immense Qing armies, well armed with ample gunpowder weapons, to pose an existential threat, though they certainly alarmed the Qing. More videos on the Mongols are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and
12. And what's here? I deleted that, yeah. 36, 512, 34, 88, 36, 34, 71, 4, 71, 313, 71, 313. All right. time to go get some more work done. All right, I will be back tomorrow morning, maybe later today, but probably tomorrow morning. Probably won't be back later today. So yeah, check out my books, check out the streams. If you have any questions, ask me on the chats. And yeah, I will be back. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. Oh, wait. Didn't mean to do that. Cobias. Nope. Derpa derpa. Let me do the obligatory. Check me out on Amazon. Woo! It's funny how the cat goes to the bathroom and it's like Zeew! But yeah, let me see something real quick. Not yet. I am waiting on I was talking a few days ago about that audiobook deal. I think I've got it, and I think it's gone through, but I'm waiting for confirmation, and if so, I'll let you know. But yeah, pretty dope stuff. So yeah, see you tomorrow or later tonight. We'll see. Peace. Write a book in 30 days. Check out my stuff. Gabriel Rathwig.